Cari fratelli e sorelle, buona Pasqua. Benedicat vos, omnipotens Deus, Pater, et Filius, et Spiritus Sancti.
All right, to our breaking news now on Pope Francis, head of the Catholic Church and sovereign of the Vatican City State, has died aged 88. Pope Francis was elected in 2013, marking a new era for the Catholic Church as its first leader from the Western Hemisphere, the first from South America and the first from the Jesuit order. His legacy will include many reforms to the Church and its reputation, namely in addressing the climate crisis, his endeavour to promote unity and his historic apology to survivors of sexual abuse. His final days were spent in Rome's Gemelli Hospital, battling a prolonged asthmatic respiratory crisis while being treated for pneumonia and a complex lung infection. He'd received blood transfusions after tests showed low counts of platelets, which are needed for clotting. Nine's Brett McLeod begins our coverage of this breaking news.
265 popes had come before him, but his was a papacy of firsts. The first pope from the Americas, the first pope from the Southern Hemisphere, the first Jesuit in the role. Born in Buenos Aires in 1936, Jorge Mario Bergoglio was the son of Italian migrants who escaped fascist Italy. His father worked on the railways. He was a born fighter. When he was 21, an infection meant part of his lung had to be removed. Jorge graduated as a chemical technician. His first jobs were as a janitor and a bar bouncer before choosing the path to the priesthood. He was ordained in 1969. He became Archbishop of Buenos Aires. And in 2001, he was made a cardinal by Pope John Paul II. He held several key administrative positions before, in 2013, at the age of 76, his fellow cardinals elected him leader of the world's 1.3 billion Catholics. Taking the name Francis, the patron saint of animals and helper of the poor.
Buonasera.
He set the tone early. On the night he was elected, he passed up a ride in the papal limousine and travelled on a bus back to his hotel and chose to stay in a simple apartment, passing up the much larger official residence, saying, "I can't live here, I would die. I need people." Pope Francis shunned the lavish regalia of his predecessors and preferred the common touch.
I think a lot of people that was very far away from the church returned to the church because this man can speak in a very simple way to everybody.
His mission was to transform the long-standing conservative image of the Catholic Church. He spoke out for society's most marginalised and called for urgent action on climate change. In 2016, he gave priests the power to forgive women who undergo abortions. He was hell-bent on rooting out corruption in the Vatican's finances and dealing with the horrific legacy of child sex abuse within the Church. And he took his message around the world. A strong advocate for interfaith discussions, he visited more than 60 countries. His travels documented in an award-winning production. The pandemic couldn't stop him. War, the only barrier, leaving him to pray for the victims of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and it brought him to tears. Pope Francis gained a reputation for being approachable and down to earth, often described as the people's pope, the pope of the 99%.
People were very struck by his concern for others. I think that was there from the very, very beginning. It's actually the way he's living now as pope isn't so different from how he used to live as Cardinal Archbishop of Buenos Aires. But that's Pope Francis. He is above all a pastor.
Time named him Person of the Year in 2013, one of many magazine covers he made. As he joined the world of Twitter, he became a social media star with more than 18 million followers, and he became an Instagram influencer. But he had enemies within the Church, his critics saying he strayed too far from the Catholic doctrine. In turn, he complained that traditionalist Catholics were gagging the Church's modernising reforms. He and his predecessor represented different sides of a theological struggle. But when Pope Emeritus Benedict died, Francis presided over his funeral and said he'd seen him as a friend and a guide. Only weeks later, he gave the blessing for George Pell, even as it was revealed the cardinal he called his right-hand man in the Vatican was in private one of his fiercest critics. He suffered ill health much of his time in Rome. Back and knee issues often left him struggling. In 2021, he needed bowel surgery. A bout of pneumonia had him in hospital again in 2023. Despite resignation rumours, he vowed to carry on as Pope as long as he could, until he could fight on no more. Pope Francis taken to hospital with bronchitis in early February before the Vatican revealed he had pneumonia once again. His final week spent appointing sympathisers to key posts. Many of the cardinals chosen by him will now form the electors for his successor, hoping to ensure his legacy, a progressive tinted papacy, continues. Brett McLeod, 9 News.
Okay, so we are covering the death of Pope Francis, who has died at the age of 88. This news coming to us just in the final seconds before we came on air tonight with your 6 o'clock news. That is a live shot of the Vatican, St Peter's Square, as the news will now be filtering out across Rome and indeed the world. And what you will see over the coming days is that square fill up with pilgrims from around Europe and indeed further afield as they come to pay tribute to Pope Francis, who has died at the age of 88. Of course, the death of a pontiff triggers a huge transition for the Catholic Church. After Pope Francis is farewelled, the new head of the Church needs to be appointed in what is truly a deeply symbolic process.
The People's Pope has passed, and Catholics around the world are mourning him. During the next few weeks, solemn ancient traditions will play out. The Vatican now enters a 9-day mourning period. Multiple masses will be held. Pope Francis's body will be blessed. He will lie in state in St Peter's Basilica, where the public can pay their respects. Known for his no-fuss approach, in 2024 the Pope approved a stripped-down funeral for himself. Normally, a Pope's body would be displayed on a raised platform, but Francis instead said he wishes to lie in an open wooden coffin without too much pomp and pageantry.
He doesn't want to lose that humbleness, and the attitude that he made him who he is.
The Pope must be buried between the 4th and 6th day after death. Foreign dignitaries and world leaders will flock to Italy for the funeral, along with thousands of devastated Catholics. Typically, popes are buried in a crypt beneath St Peter's Basilica. But in yet another break from tradition, Francis has chosen to be laid to rest at the Santa Maria Maggiore Basilica in Rome, making him the first pope in a century to be interred outside the Vatican.
Close to Madonna, where he goes, Holy Mary, where he goes very often, he goes to pray.
The period between popes is known as the interregnum. The College of Cardinals oversees the Church's administration, but no significant decisions are made. The process to choose the next person to lead the Catholic Church is known as the conclave and begins 15 to 20 days after the Pope's passing. It's a highly secretive process that unfolds behind closed doors in the Sistine Chapel. This famous phrase is spoken
extra omnes,
Latin for all out. Cardinals are locked inside and take an oath of secrecy. Only those under the age of 80 are eligible to cast ballots, which will include Australian-based Mykola Bychok, named a cardinal in December 2024, the youngest at the age of just 44. The successful candidate must receive the required 2/3 majority of the vote. The conclave that elected Pope Francis in 2013 took around 24 hours, but others have taken far longer. One in the 13th century took nearly 3 years.
There is, however, probably quite a lot of pressure on the cardinals. All the cardinals will feel that pressure to conclude the election fairly quickly, because in an age of 24-hour news cycles, we don't want to be waiting 2, 3, 4 weeks.
Once ballots are counted, they are burned in a stove. A second stove burns a chemical which sends a smoke signal through a chimney as the eyes of the world await news. Black smoke means there is no decision. White smoke symbolises the election of a new pope and a new era for the Catholic Church. Jessica Millward, 9 News.